everyone, and we welcome you to this conversation, this meeting of the minds. Just before we begin, I would like to take a moment of silence to acknowledge our heavy hearts for the victims of the American Airlines and U.S. Army air collision and their families. If you could just take a moment with me to just acknowledge the loss we've suffered. Thank you very much. As we begin, you'll notice that while you have entered in mute, this is always an active and open conversation. So as we proceed through our time together, any thoughts you have, anything you'd like to add along the way, we ask you to come off of mute or enter the chat and share with us what's on your mind. So the first thing we want to open up with is, again, your perspective. And so we've got a little poll, and if you could leverage the chat or again, unmute and share with us, what has your attention the most right now? Is it hiring great talent, great additions to your team? Is it retaining those star players that you have on your bench? Is it motivating your existing talent, really rallying them around the mission and the strategy? Or is it all the above? Right away, I can see Jonathan saying hiring. Loris, like all the above. Angela, Megan, they're all the above. Oh my goodness. So this is going to be a timely conversation, and I really look forward to where we land. And I did want to provide the perspective that you're not alone. What we see here from a Deloitte survey just towards the end of last year is that 54% of CEOs are going to prioritize investment for talent acquisition and transformation in this year. So whatever we're trying to accomplish, we can only accomplish it with great people, and we're all in this together. So we have some amazing thought leaders. I'm so excited to share with you today. So let me introduce Gavin Spears. He is the CEO of Solutions Driven, an international hiring partner that specializes in overcoming global hiring challenges with precision. Under Gavin's leadership, Solutions Driven has successfully completed hiring projects across more than 60 countries, delivering the right talent the first time. As more than a hiring partner, Solutions Driven leverages data and insights from each process to help clients enhance their hiring strategies. Thank you, Gavin. Welcome.
Catherine.
Yeah. We are also joined by Audrey McGuckin, CEO and founder of McGuckin Group. She has over 3 decades of experience in cultivating talent, reimagining leadership, and transforming culture. As the CEO of McGuckin Group, she's partnered with Fortune 100 organizations across 52 countries to design and deliver long-term talent planning processes. And really, her work ensures that people, processes, and cultures align with business strategies. Hello, Audrey.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and welcome everybody. What I love about these sessions is that we have an international audience. We have people from continental Europe, we have people from Scotland, we have people from all over the US. I don't think we have folks on from Asia in this session, but welcome everybody. Additionally, we have people from what I call all walks of life, from David joining us from the Cleveland Clinic to non-profit organizations to large multinationals, and everybody's welcome, because here's the thing: people are people and humans are humans, and the tactics that we use are largely the same, except one of the things we do is put the context over it. So my favorite topic, we're going to hop right in. And we're going to start with this idea of what on earth is a talent strategy? What do we mean by that? Here's what we mean. It is this broad definition of how do I hire? How do I source? How do I onboard people? And then when I get them on board, how do I make sure I keep them engaged and develop them and retain them? And here's the tricky thing. It can't be one or the other, because if you over pivot on one and you forget the other, you're going to see that somewhere down the line. Let's keep going. And this is something I found interesting. When you look at a lot of the research, and I always tell this story, I worked for a large multinational organization, and I would say to the CFO, can I come to Wall Street with you and can I carry your bags? And he said, sure. But the reason I wanted to go is I wanted to talk to the analysts and I wanted to ask them, does talent matter when you value a company? And they said, it sure as heck does. And what we find is that 76% of company value is attributed to employees, and yet only 32 organizations in that study showed that they had a talent strategy. Now, intuitively, we know that. We know that talent's important because that's the only thing we hear when we talk to our clients. But why is it important? Let me just give you some perspective here. Move these slides along. First of all, it ensures that we align the workforce with the business needs. And this is one of my favorite points, and I'm going to talk to you more about that in a second here. The second reason for having a talent strategy is we get better engagement, we get more productivity, and we just get happier people. Turnover. One of the biggest questions I get asked is, how do I retain my people? And how do I stop the bleeding? And here's what I'll tell you. It's got very little to do with compensation. It's got very little to do with compensation. And it helps build a resilient, future-ready workforce. And here's the last piece. It enhances your competitive advantage. I worked for a client in Indiana, and I spoke to some of their clients and I said, why do you give this company more share of wallet? Why do you give them more business? And why are they always at the top of your supplier list? And they said, because they have great leaders and they have a great culture. And so having done this work for 3 decades, we know that this matters. But there's some mistakes that people make. Let's talk about the mistakes. I like to talk about problems. Here's the first thing. Talent strategy is owned by HR. Alan McWatt, I know you're a great leader in HR, but if you own the talent strategy, there's a problem. Megan, I know you're an amazing leader in HR, but if you own the talent strategy, there's a problem. It's got to be co-owned by the business, because here's one of the mistakes we see, that the talent strategy sits in isolation. The HR people either find themselves having to do it because the business won't get involved, or the business wants to get involved, but they may not have, an HR team that they can help them with. So we need both. It can't sit in isolation. The other problem we see is sometimes organizations don't like to differentiate. What do I mean by that? When we did work with Disney, we said to them, what are your critical jobs for this talent strategy? And here's what they said. One of the aspects of our business strategy is ensuring customer satisfaction. The job in Disney that ensures customer satisfaction is the gal or the guy sweeping the street. Because who do you go and ask for where the restrooms are or where the restaurant is? And if you don't get good service, that impacts their business strategy. So you have to differentiate. You can't treat everybody the same. And so Disney invests millions and millions of dollars in training the folks in the parks. And then here's the other problem. We tackle it and we think one size fits all. And that's not the case. Because what is good for Cleveland Clinic is not good for Sandra in her nonprofit world. They're two very different things. And so we have to tackle them differently. And here's the other thing that I love to do is I love to talk about problems, but then I love to talk about, okay, well, what should we do about that? How can we tackle that? Here's an easy frame. And I want you to write this down. Just write down, if this, then that. And remember that. If this is our business strategy, then that's our talent strategy. Let me unpack that for you a little bit more. If we have a growth through mergers and acquisition business strategy, we better figure out how we build an integration talent strategy. If we have, this is a nice way of saying it, a strategic cost management strategy, which ultimately means cost cutting, which ultimately means we need to figure out where every red cent's coming from. Then you need an operational leadership strategy. You need people that can rip the cost out of the P&L. If, we were with some organizations in Guadalajara last week, and they had a growth strategy, and they were looking to enter new markets in healthcare. Now, guess what? They better figure out in their talent strategy how they get some healthcare talent capabilities into the system. So let me go back. So for those that wrote down if this, then that, I just want you to remember that. And that will help you navigate your talent strategy. Because if you can't answer if this, how can you answer that? If you can't answer where's the business going, are we growing from 10 billion to 17 billion? Are we declining? Are we entering new markets? Are we trying to move from Taiwan to Guadalajara? We're trying to be on the West Coast. If you can't answer this, it's going to be very difficult for you to answer that. And I love this next image. It's this idea of one of the other problems is, we have the opportunity to run about with our head on fire is pretty high. We get people, screaming from the business, or we get customers saying, we need more product and we need it fast. And how many of us get overwhelmed with the immediate? It's like, I just need to make this higher, or I just need to have this conversation. And if you can't go back to your talent strategy, you'll continue to have your hair on fire. Here's the other thing. We feel like we need to tackle everything at once. And I want you to write this down as well. Ruthlessly prioritize. Because if you're going to be strategic, you have to know what the yeses are, but you have to know what the nos are. And how are you going to ruthlessly prioritize against the this of the business strategy? Because if we don't get all of these things right, here's what happens. We'll end up somewhere we never expected to be, right? And we've done all this work, and we've been hiring all these people, and we've been working on engagement, and yet if it doesn't meet the business needs and we can't cross the bridge, goodness, we're leaving ourselves wide open, right? And we all have a responsibility. There's business leaders on this call. There's executive coaches on this call. There's HR people on this call. And we all have a responsibility to figure out, how do we make sure the bridge lines up? How do we make sure everything lines up with the business strategy? And I want to leave you with a framework here. It's one that we use a lot. It's very simple and it's very memorable. It's called the 6 Bs. And the first one is, what's your build strategy? How are you going to build internal talent? How are you going to find out where your high potential leaders are and build them fast? The second one is, if you have critical people in your organization you can't afford to lose, do you have a buying strategy wrapped in? Have you got your arms around them? Do you know what their needs are? Have you really figured that out? The third one, and my dear friend Gavin, who you'll notice has a very similar accent to mine, is going to talk to you about acquiring the right talent. Then, how do you actually boost and fast track some of your talent? There's some people in your organization that can go really fast. Borrow. That might be contracting, outsourcing, or bringing in other business units. And this last one is really, we call it bridge, but it can sometimes be called bounce, meaning, who do you need to exit from the organization? Who do you need to bridge into another team? Who do you need to help bridge into another organization? And how do you do that in a really meaningful way that sits well with your culture? So 6Bs. So talent strategy seems really big and illustrious, but we break it down to if this, then that. Don't move without knowing you're this, and then leverage your 6Bs. And I promise you, we've got some amazing frameworks that we can share with you around how you tackle that. But as I talk about the 6Bs, what I'd really like to do is to pass back to Catherine and bridge us over into this next piece of the conversation.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing on talent strategy, Audrey. Because as we heard in the beginning, it's well-rounded. So we know that we're trying to develop, retain, build up that good culture with our existing team, but bringing in new people with fresh perspectives and skill sets, that's critical. That's a critical component of a talent strategy. So thankfully, we've got an expert, Mr. Gavin Spears here to share with us what's really happening in 2025. Gavin.
Super, Catherine. Thanks for the intro, and Audrey, thanks for the initial part. I think just before I start, we may have similar accents, but we are sitting in different sides of the world right now. But we have a lot of respect for the McGuckin Group. I think the work that the team do is excellent. I think from my point of view, if I look at will 2025 really be the rebound year for hiring? So I'm a hiring professional. I'm not a fortune teller. So I think from that point of view, anything I say today, there's a caveat that says it's only my view. I think if I look at 2025, I almost want to take a step back to look at previous years and previous cycles that we've seen. And I think, we've been doing this 25 years, so we've definitely seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of hiring. But really, before we look at 2025, just wanted to take a step back. So we've categorized this into 4 areas, which we call the hiring landscape. If we look at 2020, which feels many, many years ago, what happened was what we call the hiring impasse. I think clearly with the impact of COVID, widespread hiring freezes, a lot of organizations looking at cost control, a lot of people feeling that, their workloads were increasing, and also a lot of people just panicking, thinking, how do I stay safe, but how do I stay financially secure? I think then what happened in 21, 22, we call hiring insanity, because we've seen so many organizations almost hiring for the sake of it, feeling that they needed to hire to rebound. And also at the same time, many candidates or employees saying, now's the time to move, make a fresh start. And not only did that tighten the labour market, but clearly increased competition. And everyone really started to panic about how do we attract, how do we retain, how do we prevent people burning out, etc., etc. And it's funny, and Nikki on the call, our growth leader, will testify to this. We had many conversations with clients through that period where we would start a call and they said, we're looking for a sales director. In fact, we need 2. We're going to split the market. In fact, we want to hire someone that does sales enablement as well. And it just felt a bit out of control. And we talk a lot internally. Everyone's heard the analogy, ready, aim, fire. We talk a lot internally about ready, aim, hire. And I think at that point, we've seen a lot of organizations ready, hiring, and then aiming. And there was real disconnects in the market. I think we then look at the next couple of years, and we've classified that as hiring inertia. So it's not that hiring has stopped, but I think people have been more particular about, if they need to hire. There's definitely been workforce stabilization. We've definitely seen more internal mobility. We've definitely seen organizations focusing on how do we improve our terms and conditions to keep our best talent in the organization, which has ultimately then reduced turnover. And also, I think there's been a lot of candidates in the last 18 months or so that are saying, maybe the grass isn't greener. Maybe we should just stay put right now to see what happens next. I think, again, if I'll maybe go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about 2025 in a bit more detail. We're calling 2025 the hiring impact phase. And my view is that we're definitely starting to see organizations think more about hiring, but they'll be more strategic with those hires. So to Audrey's point, it's about making sure that talent acquisition strategy does align with business goals, that the organization is hiring people that can have a real strategic impact to the business, which should be a prerequisite anyway, but definitely we're seeing more organizations focus on that. I think also hiring is usually a reactive sport, so companies will come and say, I need this person now. we're definitely getting a bit more balance in quality over quantity or quality over speed. So organizations that are saying, yes, this is critical, yes, I'm under pressure, but it's more important that we get the right hire rather than the first hire or the quickest hire. I think then if we look at other areas of what we're seeing in this hiring impact, I think people are now looking and saying, okay, if we're hiring, can this person help us scale or grow or have future success in the organization? We talk a lot about step up, step in, or step forward talent. So really step up is talent that maybe isn't at that level but has high potential. Step in is someone that's at that level, and step forward is someone who can take the business forward. And I think more people are looking, saying, can this talent really take the business forward? I think, again, it's a prerequisite. I mean, this piece should be in every slide and every year, but I think historically it was about culture fit. I think now we're seeing people focus on culture add. So what elements do we have missing in the organisation? What styles of people do we feel we need to support the organisation? And then definitely, last point, we're seeing a lot more on internal development, upskilling, internal mobility alongside external hiring. Because I think, it goes without saying, when one chess piece moves, the other moves, and really making sure that you've got the plan of growing and developing talent, but also in parallel to external hiring. So I think then, what are we seeing, from our client base? So we put a survey out in November 2024, looking at plans for 25, and that went out to about 1,800 people. So I can't say it's a global survey, but it's a big enough data point to get a feel for what's happening. Out of that survey, we looked at our clients, or the people we've hired, and the people that have been through our process as candidates. But from a hiring point of view, 44% of our clients expect an increase in the hires that they will make in 25 to 24. Secondly, 40% of our hiring leaders plan to expand their teams. 46% of our clients noted that to attract talent, they want to revisit salary. But I agree with Audrey, and I'll talk about that in a second. I think the salary element is one dimension of the total talent attraction plan. Then at hiring efficiency, we're definitely seeing a big push, in particularly HR teams saying, what can I do to improve efficiency, automation, through the hiring and also HR processes. And then lastly, 56% of the candidates that we polled said they were more open to new career opportunities than they were historically. So I guess there's some positives there, but there's also some areas that impact that. There's no doubt that we expect the hiring market in 25 to be more dynamic than 24. So we do think that hiring needs will rise, due to businesses trying to recover and grow. We also think that employee turnover will rise. And my last point is really important, and I don't say this often, but both sides are going to be hiring in 2025. So what I mean by that is, as hiring teams are thinking about who are we hiring, employees and candidates are thinking, who am I joining? And I guess, when one starts to increase, the other has an impact. Because you just think about it, if company X is hiring, they're taking someone from somewhere else, and all of a sudden, turnover starts to happen. So, I think for hiring leaders on the call, when your organization is hiring, someone else is also hiring your potential employees as well. So we just need to think that through. I think then, what does the future, workforce really care about? Again, I've probably picked another crystal ball subject here, but I'll do my best to give some thoughts. I think we've seen, we were at a conference last year, and it was very evident that in the current workforce, there is, almost 5 generations that have different demands and different needs and different expectations. And I've got a slide later because I'm really aware that many roles can't offer flexibility. Many roles can't offer remote working. I completely understand. But that said, the future workforce are still caring about flexible working. And in fact, if we look at, the importance of EVP, the importance of the new workforce seeing what does this employer brand really mean to me, that is increasing over the last 3-4 years. And also, despite fewer remote working roles, because we've seen a trend where COVID, peaked, it started to decline slightly. We've got some major corporates now almost doing zero tolerance to remote working. Despite all of that, 66% of the people that we polled still think it's important to have that flexibility when they're considering a job offer. If we then look at transparent and efficient hiring processes, so this is interesting. again, I think it's very generational, but I think efficiency is important, but also transparency. Candidates expect smooth recruitment process. It's almost a prerequisite, and it becomes a major negative talking point if that hiring process is disconnected. So we talk a lot with our customers around how smooth is their hiring process. How can they take out waste? How can they lean that hiring process to make it efficient? Secondly, 39% of candidates would abandon lengthy applications, so instant turn-off. And also 78% of candidates expect the hiring process from an application point of view to take less than 30 minutes. If we then look at the last couple of points here before I summarise. So skills-based selection is a really interesting one. I mean, we've done many webinars on, what does it mean? How do organisations bed in that philosophy? And again, happy to share anything offline. What's really interesting though is we're starting to see candidates also expect that. So I would have said 18 months ago to 2 years ago, hiring managers were saying, how do I select more based on skills rather than experience? How do I not, hire looking in the mirror and hire someone that's the same as me with the same background? How do I open the talent pool? But day in, day out, we have candidates that are critiquing ourselves, saying, how are you building skills-based, into the hiring process? So again, I think it's really important for hiring leaders on the call to realise that skills-based selection isn't just an organisation effort, it's also a candidate driver, that we're seeing. I think inclusivity, diversity, I'm sure a lot of people have got views on that. I think that some organisations have certainly put a strange message out to say it's not as important as it once was, which we don't agree with. I think what I would say is, we track, when we're doing hiring scoping calls, we track, things that are mentioned, touch points, etc. And we can see that from 22 to 24, there's been a 40% decrease in hiring teams mentioning diversity. Now, you could say it's one of two reasons. Positively, we hope that it's just baked into their process and it's become the norm. But actually, what we believe is when organisations are under constraints and pressure, they do revert back to type, which is, let's just hire someone with sector experience, with the same background, etc. I think what we're definitely seeing, the point I make in the slide, is the element of accessibility also being added into DE&I. So really looking at how do hiring programs complement and accommodate any disabilities to really ensure, the true inclusivity. And then lastly, and I guess it's slightly obvious, and I know there's some laws and regulations in certain states, in the US, but if we look at it, and this was from LinkedIn, there is no doubt candidates or applicants prefer transparency when it comes to compensation. Now, I think that's just for an easy life and saying, am I applying for a role that's suitable? And equally, we know from a hiring point of view that can cause disconnects internally, etc. But again, when you're asking me, what does the workforce care about? That's something to take into account for the future. And this one is really interesting. And again, this comes from a LinkedIn, hiring report. Please be assured, I'm not saying everyone should just be remote and hybrid and that makes life easy. What I am saying is if we look at the impact of the different policies on hiring, you can see 4 situations here. You can see fully in office, office first hybrid, fixed hybrid, and flexible hybrid. And I'd maybe ask your eyes to look at the light green number. What this is looking at is what percentage of the hiring population says that the different scenario impacts, their thoughts on hiring. So only 7% was positive about fully in office versus 10 times that, 77% positive and flexible hybrid. Now, as I said, I'm not saying certain roles, certain manufacturing roles can be remote. I completely understand. But all I'm saying is, as you're building a candidate value proposition, really just make sure it's resonating with the candidate market that you're looking to attract. And then last piece for me, we believe a lot in human hiring. So, I think that in the world of AI, which we're all using and we're all embracing and we're all getting excited about what it can do for us, people buy from people, and to Audrey's point, earlier, humans are humans. We take our own team, but also our clients on a very straightforward engagement journey as we're going through a hiring process. And I think it's really important in today's world that any hiring process that you build, it's particular for future workforces that it covers these 3 areas. So curiosity, are we doing enough as a hiring team to really get the right type of candidate curious about us, that they're excited, they're interested, they want to know more, they like what they see, it's authentic, it's transparent, etc., etc. Moving into comfort, are we then making that, candidate or prospect comfortable about their ability to open up and share and talk and have a discussion? And then lastly, do we feel we're getting that candidate committed to the hiring process? I think my last point would be taking Audrey's point earlier around salary isn't everything. I completely agree. We talk about 6 factors that drive engagement, through a hiring process for a candidate. What are candidates considering? We talk about fit, freedom, fulfillment, family, fortune, and future. And our research would show that when candidates are going through this journey, they're trying to say, what are the 2 or 3 things that's really going to make me excited about, this organisation or this hiring process? And I think that's everything from my side.
Wow. I mean, I was just taking plenty of notes and I could see the chat kind of sparking up. We really do want to open this up. We're trying to share some thought leadership with those of you who've joined us. So if anybody have any questions or any thoughts they wanted to share, I'd love to make some space for that right now.
I do have a question for Gavin. Just based on your experience and research, I'm working I'm an external coach for a software company, and they offer a lot of fantastic benefits. They're fully remote, and yet they still have an issue with talent retention. And the only thing I can think about that I can kind of, well, maybe that's not ideal because they're doing a lot of things right, is that maybe values alignment in terms of corporate values versus personal values. And can you speak to that at all in your hiring process?
And it's a really good point. And I never mentioned it today, but I'll bring it up now, Laura. I think that we work with many companies that talk about their EVP. So, I think most people know what that is. And for me, that's simple in terms of, what is going to make an employee stay and grow within the organization. I think what many people don't do is talk about a CVP, candidate value proposition, and what are the things that's going to attract candidates to join the organization. We worked with a client maybe 2 years ago, Laura, and a similar situation, I guess, where they were hiring people, but there were some disconnects. And I think up front, the organization wasn't as clear as they could have been on what's our why, what's it like to be here, what's important to us, etc. And I think that candidate value proposition was a little bit misaligned. So I don't know the detail of the organization, but I'd certainly be saying, make sure you compare the CVP to the EVP.
Gavin, if I could build on that for Laura, one of the things that we do with a lot of our clients is we just switch the thinking from exit interviews to stay interviews. And it's really simple. And here's the question, and write this question down. What would have to be true for you to feel inspired, motivated, and for you to stay with this organization? And just listen. Just listen to what they have to say. They might talk about family. They might talk about work hours. They might say, I've got a terrible boss. We don't know what they're going to say. What would have to be true for you to be inspired, motivated, and to stay with this company? And just listen.
Thank you. That's great. That's a great question.
I guess even taking that a step further as well, how do you start to talk about these things more proactively, month to month, quarter to quarter?
Yeah, I think that's right. Catherine, did somebody else have a question? I think.
Yeah, we do. We have some activity in the chat, and Jane Pleasance, hello, Jane, has a really, I think, timely question, especially with the political environment globally and here in the United States. The thoughts around the United States federal government stance on DEI. How are you both seeing that impacting hiring? Or Jane, I'll brought it up even a little bit more around company culture. But Jane, did you want to give voiceover to that before they jump in?
No, I think you said it well. I'm curious as to how that's impacting each of the organizations that are on this call too, and how maybe folks are dealing with it.
Yeah, I'd actually, I think Gavin and I can speak to it, but goodness, I'd love to hear from some other folks on the call that might want to share their views, because it's timely and it's in some ways controversial.
Mhm.
I've got my eye on somebody, and Sandra, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're such an amazing CEO, and a CEO of an incredible organization. Also, I tend to love your points of view, and could we create a little bit of space for you, Sandra?
Sure, it's interesting because I'm all over the news today dealing with a refugee crisis that has been manufactured. So that's where my headspace is, with media requests coming through to talk about that. But I will say that we have among the most diverse workforces in the Tampa Bay region, from an international and gender and sexual identity and all of that. Really, we don't receive any funding for our work in diversity, but we are being targeted because of our work with refugees, and some of our income from the federal government has been frozen. That being said, this appeal that I did in the press release to bring and raise awareness, and I think that's really where we have to go with this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. This is what the world is about, and certainly what America was built on. And so we're basically saying we won't sit quietly by, and it's bringing tremendous resources and advocacy. And so today is going to be a big day. What one of my employees in HR did, which is quite interesting, is the day that these notices came out about diversity and equity and inclusion last week, was a quick response to all employees that they were no longer mandating our DEI training, that it was going to be optional. And I kind of hit the roof, but knowing that that person didn't report to me, I had to stay in my lane. But I've reminded our workforce that, no one is basically authorized to speak on all of these things, because the tone and what we're trying to do is very important. And so, so we're not getting funding for it, but we are being targeted because of our work.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing, Sandra. And one of the things I like to do is to link and label parts of the conversation. And if I could take some permission to link and label what I heard, is the world we live in today is complex, and it takes very elegant navigation skills. And we can't just be jumping out and saying things without the context around it, because it's so complicated. And so that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, the business case for diversity and inclusion is clear. The business case for having diverse teams, whether it's neurodiversity or any other diversity, and the inclusion is clear. And yet here in the United States, we're having to deal with this political phenomena that trapped all around it. So Jane, I know that's not a black and white answer, but I don't think it's a black and white question.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we've made a ton of progress, I think, relative to women in supply chain with our Advancing Women Leaders program. And you do reflect back on your organization, and do they mirror the population? And, how do you respond? I love the word elegant, because I do think that's a good way to phrase it. And so that's why I was just asking the question of the group on this call, because you all have leadership responsibilities and so many HR professionals here too. How is that impacting you all? So thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Karen, I think you might have wanted to hop in.
Yeah, this actually became a topic of conversation with some of the people I've been coaching prior to the 20th. But one of the things Gavin said really jumped out at me about making it part of the culture. And in a way, what I'm encouraging people to think about is, okay, if it's not a mandate, that's fine. It's hard to mandate something like that. And think of it more from a standpoint of how do we make it better? We're human beings and we do have bias. That's part of being human. So recognize that we all do have bias and recognize that that's not a good way to hire. So how do we train ourselves and catch ourselves so that we're really hiring for what matters? And how do we create a culture that just does that naturally instead of by mandate?
Yeah, that's right. Makes the
Maybe
world better.
maybe a couple of things on that, Karen. I mean, I think we're fortunate enough to work with some organisations that are absolutely educating us on, best in practice, DE&I, but we also work with some other organisations that almost need dragged over the line, to get into best practice. I think, my two things would be the more we can just make it part of the process, and make people feel that they're doing the right thing by, focusing on a diverse, hiring shortlist, etc. But one of my pet hates is, organisations who during the hiring process start to change and say, actually, we now need 70% of the long list to be diverse. Okay, fair enough. But the challenge then is, they're not measuring where that talent goes in the pipeline. So, it's almost a tick box to say we need diverse talent in the shortlist, but then, not worry about what happens thereafter. But as I said, we work with some clients that are absolutely outstanding on that front, but others definitely need some education to build it into the culture.
Yeah. And we find that too, it's a journey, and we're seeing organizations at different levels of maturity. But, to your point, Jane, is this, tenor going to push us back, push us forward? What will the impact be? I see at MC Wata, I don't think that's your name, but I said what your name was on the screen, and you have your hand raised. So I want to make space for you as we round out our conversation.
But now you've called me out. I know some of the
I
folks on
have.
this call are now going to call me MC Watt. Right. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think it's been a fantastic session, first of all. I've been nodding here. I was scared to come off camera because I felt like I was nodding like a puppy dog. And I just wanted to show some diversity across here as well, because I know I sound nothing like Audrey and nothing like Gavin. The three of us and Nikki, who's on the call, that the three of us are from really close to one another in Scotland. And I'm fed up getting asked in California what part of Ireland you're from. So I love educating my Californian colleagues on diversity, because I think I've had it more in California than anywhere I've ever lived. So, which is surprising, right? Which is really surprising, because the perception of the US or the perception of California is just so diverse, right? So we'll stop jumping in and just ask. So I keep thinking, if I get that, what's it like for others, right? Yes. When it comes to diversity. And I think, like some of my notes here was, everybody in this call gets it, totally gets it. That's why they're on the call. I think there's a number of business partners that certainly need some education on bringing talent in. And I was with a CEO and a CFO last night, and we were talking about how you will never complain that we hire people too quickly. Never. Right? But you'll always complain when we've not hired the right people. Right? So why do we not, like, one of our key KPIs, right, is predominantly time to fill, right? And it's driving that time to fill down, right? As opposed to, you need to drive it down, but you also need to reduce your turnover and increase your retention and your stability, whatever words you want to use against that. And so I think slowing down the hiring, I think, is key. And we have hiring managers that understand it's a key process, but they don't give the time to spend time with the candidate. So they'll schedule 30 minutes. Maybe it's my accent, but it takes me 20 minutes to say, good morning, my name is Alan, right? This is my role with the company. And people say, could you repeat that again? Right? So then we're all read into that period. But I think hiring managers spending real quality time on attracting the talent. And then when they're in the door, right, so we've slowed down the hiring process, but increased the onboarding, increased the orientation, right, and doing the 30, 60, 90. And some people think once they get to 90, yeah, we'll forget about them. But it's then flipping back to Audrey's point on the stay interviews and just spending time with people. So I've got a whole list of people that I think they should benefit from sessions like this to understand the whole process, and then the value add at the end. And I think since I've got the microphone,
Take it off them, quick.
on the DE&I point, I think, and I remember hiring a new CIO, and she says to me, I really hope I never got this job because of that. And that's all she done, right? And it was a phenomenal message to me, right? That she didn't want to be recruited because of her ethnicity or because of her gender, right? She wanted to be recruited because she was the right person for the job, right? And I really like Gavin's point earlier on about D&I and maybe the numbers are reducing. And maybe that's just, that's the price of entrance, right? Organizations just, they have to do that now.
Yeah. And, I think that this is such a dynamic and multifaceted kind of idea. What's the talent strategy? How does the political environment play into it? How do we bring in the right people? And so we want to reassure you that while we realize we're out of our time, the conversation has just started. So as the next steps, rest assured, we are going to follow up, providing you some of these materials. We're talking fast, sharing a lot. And then if you would love to talk further or explore this further, we're here for you. So we'll share all of that with you. And again, thank you so much to Gavin and to Audrey for sharing their perspectives, and to each of you for joining. So we wish you well. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and just know we're always here for you.